Welcome to this nonprofit NewsPod. I'm speaking with Scott Thomas, Principal and Financial Advisor at CapTrust Sacramento. Scott Thomas, welcome to this nonprofit NewsPod.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We're talking because every few years, CapTrust releases a report or a survey on endowments and foundations, and the most recent report, completed last year, is now available. Before we start, let's touch on what really is the definition or value of endowments and foundations as they relate to an individual nonprofit.
Yeah, great question. Yeah, I think you could take it a couple different ways. With a foundation, nonprofit can be used intertwined, or a quasi endowment really lets the nonprofit look longer term. Look at sustainability of the assets. So, we have clients that will open up a foundation for the goal of a building in so many years. But it's really trying to look beyond today, maybe have a rainy day fund in the future when things are a little more difficult, but also to try to grow. And I think from a donor standpoint, many organizations, nonprofits with endowments tend to add some stability to them. And the donor will look at it and understand too that every dollar they give has a chance to grow. So trying to look at nonprofits, kind of how they have things set up, obviously short-term money, but if there's a way to start growing a longer-term asset pool for an identified need or to produce income in the future can make a big difference.
And certainly endowments and foundations are invested very differently than the money that would be sitting in a bank, correct?
They are. We definitely suggest that short-term, we call tier one capital, sit at the bank, money they need over the next 6 months to a year. But then there's also certain things you can do beyond that tier one capital, depending on the time frames and the risk tolerance of the committee or the board. And really what comes down to the individual goal.
As most nonprofits now are rightfully so a little concerned about budget revisions and what it may all look like in so many different areas of their funding that actually could impact some of the operations, what's relevant for them in this report?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different things in the report. I think what we look at are certain trends. So we've been doing this for 14 years. So every other year we put out a report. So this is 2024, and obviously things can change as we've seen in the global environment. But I think you look at longer term trends, and it's great. So we had 180 respondents, half from private, half from public foundations, different demographics, and really hear what concerns them or what challenges they have, whether it's a certain organization, for example, in arts and culture that maybe doesn't get the planned in and legacy giving. And they got to respond. We got to really require more individual donors to looking at asset management, whether it's discretionary versus non-discretionary. What's the advantage of each? So I think just kind of looking through and hearing what other organizations are doing and seeing and those trends can be very valuable.
And I saw a couple of them that struck me as valuable. And part of this conversation is what we want to address with this is term limits on boards was discussed in the report, outsourced chief investment officers, which I know you want to touch on in just a second, where the investments are being directed, as well as just the general consensus of inflation in the economy. And with this coming prior to the introduction of tariffs, the impact on any nonprofit is something that they have to anticipate, regardless if it changes or not to their benefit, but they have to anticipate that it could be to their detriment. So maybe address a couple of those points for us if you could.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, any nonprofit that we work with or usually has an investment policy statement that really lays out the goals of each asset pool, the risk return profile that you're looking for. Within markets, we continuously see inflation, economic growth as being the number one concern. So last year, coming off 2 years in up market, it was less of a concern than it was to the prior survey, but it still is on top of mind. I know myself, I go into the grocery store and the price of cereal and avocados that go up constantly. The economic growth, something changes every other day and everyone's seeing it. It brings up a concern, but you really need to take a longer term approach and identify and, withstand these global markets and not having to sell at the wrong time. So yeah, we definitely see the inflation, economic growth as a concern. Term limits, we touch on that a little bit. Looks like it's interesting that larger organizations tend to have longer term limits,
Hmm.
less turnover. Maybe as they have more people on the board and they could turn over, a one or two a year. But just really interesting trends that come up from this that makes me think, and obviously anyone that runs a nonprofit can probably be some valuable information.
If nothing else, the report gives you an opportunity to at least start the process, the thought process of something maybe you weren't thinking about. The outsourced chief investment officers, outsourced anything at nonprofits is becoming a little more prolific as things change.
Yeah, the outsourced chief investment officer, OCIO, is an acronym that probably goes over people's head. It just means discretionary, turning over the investment decisions to a fiduciary that has their best interest in mind. And we definitely see that. I mean, anyone running a business, running an organization like a nonprofit has many things on their plate, and partnering with an investment firm or a fiduciary that can make these changes without having to get someone on the phone or wait for the next investment committee makes sense. So we see this across the board, organizations at all different sizes, really looking for that more ongoing discretionary management.
As people review the report, certainly one of the questions that's going to come up is maybe I do need an endowment or foundation. Maybe I need to set up the structure of the organization a little bit differently, especially given the environment we're in and they're starting to see the impact of some of the changes with budgets and the uncertainty, which is the greatest concern anybody's got. It's that uncertain element. Setting up an endowment or foundation. What are the most critical things and what would you say to get started they should do?
I think it started just having a conversation. So we have conversation with newly startup nonprofits on their goals. And not only, I mean, looking for the next 6 months or a year, but looking 3, 5, and 10 years out. And I
Mhm.
think it really starts with that. I think it's also including creating a committee, whether it's part of the board or investment committee that can, get together and strategize around that. And I do think, I mentioned at the beginning, sustainability, really looking long term and making a difference within the community, within society. In my opinion, nonprofits are the backbone of our neighborhoods.
Yes.
And how can you make sure that you're making a difference 5 or 10 years and a greater difference? And I think
Mhm.
that's really where an endowment can come in to try to grow that capital to lead to better outcomes in the future.
Great explanation. If somebody's interested in getting the report, and for the benefit of those listening, this is not a cumbersome report. It's not 400 pages of documentation. It's what, maybe 16, 18 pages at the most. But it's really salient information, and it does dig into each one of these elements a little deeper than what we just scratched on the surface. How do they go about getting it, Scott?
Yeah, and to your point, it was 50, 60 pages. We tried to skinny it up a little bit, more the Cliff Notes version, which I think people appreciate. Welcome to give me a call, 916-924-7527, or email me, scott.thomas at captrust.com. Happy to send it over. And if you'd like to have another conversation, our experiences, we've been in this community 35 years. We work with a lot of great organizations, both nonprofits, associations, and happy to pass along some of our experience.
Scott, great information. So much more in that report that I think people will benefit from, especially if they're looking at additional ways for sustainability, which is such a big topic and conversation in the nonprofit community today. Thank you so much for the valuable information, and I will put that information of contact for you in the show notes as well.
Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.